Welcome to the DMGB conversation. And I am very, very excited for this next guest. Excited to bring on today the special teams coordinator and recruiting coordinator at the University of Notre Dame, who was my head coach at the University of Nevada, where I was a special teams coordinator and running backs coach. The best special teams head coach I had ever been around. Learned a ton with him and had a blast coaching with him. So welcome to the show, Coach Brian Polian.
I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. This is fun. It's not like we got anything else to do right now, given the lockdown we're all facing.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time because, number one, I know you got family and everything else going on. So I'm really glad to have you here. For those of you who don't know the name, who aren't football people, Brian Polian is the son of Bill Polian, who is an NFL legend, built multiple really successful NFL franchises, two being the Bills and the Colts, which obviously speak for themselves. But excited today to talk to Brian about how he got into coaching, his track through it, growing up in an NFL family and stuff like that. So Coach Polian, I'm going to let you take it from here, but give us kind of the 30,000 foot view of all the stops and how you got from being Bill Polian's son growing up in Buffalo, New York, to where you are now in South Bend, Indiana.
Well, I'm still Bill Polian's son, and I'm incredibly proud of that. It's an interesting story. My father started as a high school history teacher and a baseball, basketball, and football coach. And to be honest with you, I think, and I'm reminded of that when I get the privilege to coach at Notre Dame. That my dad's an NFL Hall of Famer, but I'm living out his dream, but by coaching here. And by happenstance, by sheer luck, he ended up in the personnel world and had stops in the Canadian League, the USFL, and eventually became the youngest general manager in the NFL when he took over the Buffalo Bills in the mid to late 80s. I grew up in Buffalo. I call Buffalo home. My beautiful wife, Laura, is from Buffalo. It's interesting when you grow up in a football family. I have three siblings. If you ask the three where home is, you might get three different answers because in different stages of our lives, we're moving to different places. I did some things as a kid just because I wanted to be around my dad. And one of those was I started in the 7th grade spending my summers as a ball boy for the Buffalo Bills. And I would go to training camp with them in Fredonia, New York, which is about an hour outside of Buffalo. And Fredonia State College is where we would have training camp. And that was all throughout my high school years. And I watched the relationships that Marv Levy had with those Super Bowl teams. And I literally grew up with Jim Kelly and Steve Tasker and Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas. That was my youth. And I watched coaches like Don Lawrence and Elijah Pitts and Bruce DeHaven. And I looked at those relationships and I looked at these guys got to coach ball for a living. And I said to myself at 17 years old, I knew what I wanted to do. And I don't know if that makes me lucky. I don't know if that makes me a little simple. It's probably a combination of both. But before I ever graduated high school, I knew what I wanted to do. Got into the profession as a graduate assistant, right? I attended John Carroll University in Cleveland, small Division III non-scholarship school, played there, had a blast.
Very academic. Shout out to the academic world.
Yeah. And ended up being teammates with guys who are now at the highest levels of professional and college football. But when my time was up, the only time in my entire career, which is now 24 seasons, that my father ever made a call on my behalf was to Nick Saban at Michigan State. And the reality of it is, you need a break. Everybody needs a break. There's a lot of great coaches out there, far better than me, that just never got the break that they needed to get in. And I had worked Michigan State's camp. I knew those coaches. My dad called Nick on my behalf, and fortunately, I was able to start my career as a GA for Nick Saban. Left there, went to Baylor, Buffalo in the MAC, University of Central Florida for George O'Leary, and then at the age of 29, caught my big break when Charlie Weiss hired me here at Notre Dame. I spent 5 years here with Charlie Weiss, left to go to Stanford, where I caught incredible luck. No pun intended. We had Andrew Luck as our quarterback, and 23-3 in 2 seasons. Worked for Jim Harbaugh for a season. When Jim left, I had the opportunity to interview for the head coaching position with Bob Bowlesby, who is now the commissioner of the Big 12. David Shaw was a finalist as well. David got the job, and deservedly so. Spent a year with David. Left Stanford to go to Texas A&M, where I spent 1 year with Kevin Sumlin, and we won the Cotton Bowl, and Johnny won the Heisman, and fortunately ended up with an opportunity to interview for the Nevada job, and accepted the Nevada job at, I believe, 38 or 39 years of age. Unfortunately, we didn't win enough. There are a bunch of other factors in terms of, the AD who hired me left, and all the circumstances that it's a good job, but it's got challenges just like every other job. And we just didn't win enough. So after my time there was up, I was lucky. Brian Kelly called and said, "Would you want to come back?" And it was a no-brainer. I mean, there were other things out there, but we love this place so much. We love this community. I love the type of kids that we get to recruit and coach here. And it's really a unique recruiting presentation that you can put on. So, we've been back now, finished 3 years. We're 33-6. And the 3 years since we've come back, we had an undefeated regular season in 18. And so it's been a good run. I'll always be Bill Polian's son. I think around the time that the turning point in my career was 2 years in at Notre Dame, 2 or 3 years in at Notre Dame. I was sent to recruit the West Coast because I was young and dumb, and I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to win a whole lot of battles out there. And we signed the number 1 defensive player in the country, Manti Te'o. And I think, my involvement in what was really a 2-year recruitment that went down to the night before signing date, and our ability to sign him kind of changed the perception of that's so-and-so's son to, hey, that's Brian Polian from Notre Dame. And by the way, his dad is. So, but
I love
look,
that. I want to dive into some of this though, because there's points in this. And for those people who don't know, I want to give them a little bit of an overview. I met Coach Polian the year before I took the special teams QC job at the University of Florida. And Coach Polian knew he wanted to hire me right then and there, and I was really appreciative. But it was like deciding between going to Reno, Nevada for a year, or going to the University of Florida for a year. And it was like, what do I do? What do I do? Ended up going to Florida. And I'll never forget getting the phone call as I was preparing for Alabama in the SEC championship when you said, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" And I was like, "I'm watching Alabama's punt." Like, what's up? Like, what's going on? It's like, there's some changes happening here. I want to hire you here. Let's get this thing rolling. And I was like, awesome. It's a year later. And I think that key part of relationships, like I had met you, I got introduced to you at the Cincinnati, it was in Cincinnati. It was a Cincinnati coaching convention. And we sat there and we kicked a couple beers back, but we just talked. And getting into the sales world, everybody's so eager and gung-ho to just sell everything that they have that they never build a relationship. Like, had I sat at that table with you and tried to put on display all of the things I knew about special teams, you would have been like, who is this dweebo? Get him away from our table. I don't ever want to see him again, But because we sat and we were just people together, we built a relationship. And I think, you saw those relationships going up. How did that affect your coaching style? How did that kind of mold how you wanted to be a coach? because you were privileged to be around the elite of the elite at a young age. So when you really got into your career, and obviously you're around Nick Saban as a young coach, so you were around some unbelievable personalities and saw a lot of different dynamic relationships. How did that mold you?
Well, it's incredible that you're asking about this stuff, because I've tried to take this time that we've had here in quarantine and make sure that I put it to good use, and working on my short game in the backyard is not putting it to good use. So I actually took on a writing project and have the bones of a book right now. And the book was, in essence, a study of why building relationships is the number one thing that we have to do in coaching. That without the relationships, there's no trust. And without that trust, we can never get the most out of our young people. And then not only do we have to focus on relationships, when we choose to coach and educate, we're taking a vow that no matter what we get from the other side, we're going to be dedicated to that person, and that relationship's going to be important to us, whether it's a starter who can help me advance my career, or if it's a guy that is never going to see the field, we can't treat them differently. What I've learned along the way, and let's frame it in the coaching world first, is that the relationships are the reward. The bowl rings and the money and all that stuff, people look at our lives and they say, boy, isn't that cool? He gets to run out of the tunnel at Notre Dame Stadium. Yeah, but I've been fired a couple times too, and I've had to move my family across the country. And yeah, the money's great, and it's nice to be recognized locally. But then again, there are a lot of people on Twitter who want to tell you how dumb you are too. So the most rewarding part of the job is not with winning. It's the relationships with the players. It's the relationships with the coaches, like you and I. You're out of the profession right now, but we'll be friends forever. That's the reward. Now, as it relates to the business world, young coaches think they can get rich. They think it's cool to be called coach. They think it's cool to have, 30,000 Twitter followers, but the relationships are the most important thing. It's no different in any world. I think, short of being a computer genius that can just sit in his office alone and code, and there are professions like that. Yeah. And I'm certainly not denigrating them, but the vast majority of us have to learn how to interact with other people, and that our lives are driven by relationships and our willingness to invest in them, our willingness to meet people in the middle, or like I say with our kids, we got to meet them where they live. And it's taken me a while to figure that out. And frankly, in this little writing project I've taken on, I did not probably realize it in total until after our first year at Nevada, where I made a lot of first year mistakes and I was treating guys differently. One guy's a starter, another guy. I wasn't connecting with the team, and I had to take a step back and say, all right, what do I need to do differently? And
did you get to that conclusion on your own, or did you have somebody that helped check you in that? Because we talk about accountability partners a lot. We talk about, and I remember, Coach Erb being your kind of right-hand man on our staff. And every staff I was on, there was always that guy who sat with the head coach when everybody else didn't, Was there somebody that did that for you, or how did you come about to that?
Well, first of all, you got to give some credit to some older players on the team, because they were not afraid to speak truth to power. And that was, hey, we feel like there's we feel like there's not enough conversation going on, that it's just, you're not listening. And thankfully, I was humble enough to hear what they were saying. I was humble. I was making some mistakes. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. And I'm not embarrassed to admit that. Anybody who takes on a leadership role of that magnitude is going to make some mistakes. I had Jim Hoffer.
Jim Hoffer. Yes.
Yeah,
So
I had
not there
I
when I
had
was there.
Jim
I got
Hoffa,
a chance to meet
yeah,
him, but I
I
never
had
got a
Jim
chance
Hoffa
to
on
meet
my
him.
staff, who had been who was the first the head coach who gave me my first full-time job and was my consigliere. He was my Tom Hagen.
Yeah.
And Jim and I sat down at the end of the year and he said, "All right, here's what we did well. Here's where you can improve." And I took that to heart. And the irony, Mark, is that the best culture we had was the last year, was the 5-7 team. And people look at that record and they look at, I was released shortly thereafter, and they look at that season as a failure. But the reality of it is that season was a testament to that team and to our staff, because we suffered the tragic loss of a teammate in June, where other student athletes literally watched this guy lose his life in a drowning, Mark Ma.
Yeah.
God bless his soul. So in that whole summer, when most teams are building, we were trying to heal.
Yep.
And then, you lose your starting quarterback, you lose your best defensive lineman. I mean, it felt like everything that season that could go wrong did go wrong. And yet we kept that group together because we had talked about how important loving one another was and how important relationships were. And, we beat Utah State on the last play of the game on senior day. And I remember vividly how together we were that last week of the season, when a lot of other teams would have bagged it and said, "We're done. The season's done. We're just going to limp through this." That group kept battling. And I remember just being in the hotel before the UNLV game and everybody dapping each other up every time they passed or walked into a meeting. And we went out and beat the dog out of our rival. And
Give everybody like scope of what that game is. Like that is the game for
oh
the
yeah,
Nevada
it's
UNLV teams. Like it's the largest rivalry trophy in college
yeah,
football. It's an actual cannon, and they paint it red or blue every year. Like it is
yeah.
the game to win. And we had battled through a tough season, and we had some breaks that didn't go so well. And there was so many pieces of adversity. We had a tough game on the road. We almost beat Purdue in Purdue's in Purdue Stadium that year. Like there was so many ups and downs. And for that team at the end of the season, at the end of a long road, to just go out and beat the snot out of their rival and run that trophy around. I mean, literally, we got let go the next day. But what an incredible feeling it was to see those kids accomplish that,
But it was a testament to one another, and love is not a warm fuzzy feeling. Love is an act of service. And that team loved one another. They hung in there and they played for one another. And I was asked not too long ago in a head coaching interview, what would you do differently? And I was very, very open about the mistakes that I made. And what are you most proud of? And I talked about that 2016 team that battled through unbelievable loss and adversity, and the way they hung together. And I think back that those years were pretty transformational for me in terms of how important relationships were and how they can affect your culture.
I love it because we spend time teaching, business development people, salespeople, just business cultures in general, that everything is about relationship. And if you can build and manage relationships at scale, business will come to you. But if you focus on building relationships as the fundamental of who you are, everything else will take care of itself. But it's very different in the business world. Like everybody's just going about their job 9 to 5. It was a real shift for me to figure out, like, wait a minute, how do I balance my passion and my energy and what I want to do and how I want to do it getting out? And there's something that I stole from you that I've used forever. And I use it now because my dad and I do a lot of speaking with people, and we actually have a huddle every morning where we talk to a group of people. And it's teaching life through sport, because there are so many parallels to what I learned from my coaching career and everything that we did. And you started using that and I mean, you would say it almost in every single recruiting visit that we had, is that you loved your job because you got to teach kids life through sport, you know? And so talk to me about where that came from and how that still is involved with what you do now.
Well, it's just the most valuable lessons I've ever learned in my life were either through my own very limited athletic career, but I had two very influential high school coaches. I had one of the most influential coaches in my entire career was my college position coach. And I learned a lot about accountability, about being a teammate, about how to treat other people. And I learned a lot of those lessons too with my dad. I mean, think about what I saw in my most formative years. I saw my sophomore, junior, and senior year in high school, the Buffalo Bills reach a Super Bowl and then lose it. And that's, you know, I had to watch my father and all the people that he worked with go through this heartbreak and then pick themselves up, dust themselves off, and go back and do it again. And that group did that 4 times. It's incredible. So those were the things that I learned. I learned how to be uncomfortable. You know, I learned that if you want to, I think one of the simplest things we learn is good and comfortable can coexist. Great and comfortable cannot. You've got to be willing to leave your comfort zone. And for me to go to College Station, Texas as a New York Irish Catholic was out of my comfort zone, but I knew that it was a step that I needed to take. And frankly, taking my first head coaching position at a school in the Mountain West where I didn't have natural ties, probably viewed as an outsider by a lot of people in town, you know, so we had to be willing to. There's been so many life lessons. The career and through watching others and observing and through failure, quite honestly. And there are too many young people nowadays that think failure is fatal, that it's the end. And the reality of it is failure is simply an opportunity to learn. It's part of the learning process, and we can't be afraid to fail. And, you know, that's something that has stayed with me.
I talk about this all the time. I think about this all the time. I know how I figured it out. I failed a ton. I was fired from a lot of jobs. I was a college football coach. I probably had no business being a college football coach. I came from an equipment background and then became a student assistant. And I just hustled my way through the profession, trying to learn and do as much as I could. How do you teach that failure is not fatal? I mean, aside from allowing people to fail and them feeling it and encouraging them through it, is there any other way to teach it? Is there any other way to have it instilled in people without actually happening?
No, there's not. You have to go through it. It's like trying to describe a colonoscopy. I mean, you just until you've had to do it, you don't understand. So, but what you've got to have and what you've got to advise people, and my dad did this for me, when the end of my time came at Nevada, you suffer great personal hurt, right? And I hurt for so many reasons. I was angry because I didn't think we were necessarily treated fairly, but hey, life's not fair. I was disappointed for our players. I was hurt for our staff, especially guys like you and Coach Cramsey and Jaime, who had just joined us. So, you know, you come out thinking we're going to be there for a couple of years, and you know, the thing ends after 11 months. So, so it's no joke now. I mean, it takes some time to get over that.
No,
but there comes a point where you have to be able to bury it. And then you have to be able to honestly look yourself in the mirror and say, what did I do well? And what would I do again? And then you have to be open and honest with yourself and say, what did I do poorly? And one of the things that I did poorly was I swallowed all my frustration and all my anxiety and it would burst at times. And unfortunately, it burst a couple times on camera during a game with an official. And I needed to do a better job at delegating. I needed to do a better job of asking for help. I needed to do a better job of talking about the things that were frustrating me. The other thing I learned, and I hope to have the opportunity to put into play again, is I thought the culture in our building was fantastic. The trainer, the equipment guy, everybody in the strength staff, we were all on the same page. Yep. I didn't do a good enough job of building those same kind of bridges on campus. And in the end, you're going to need the people administratively, academically in the president's office. And so I needed to put the same type of energy I built into those relationships in our building on campus. And so, but you can't learn those lessons unless you're willing to admit where you came up short and say, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. But if you walk through life saying, those guys screwed me, forget them, you won't learn from it. And then, then the whole experience is wasted.
Then it's a waste. I love that. I mean, to be perfectly candid, and I've talked about this before on camera, but like, I know that I got myself fired with John Garrett. Like, did we see eye to eye on anything? No, we didn't see eye to eye. And do I think I was still probably right for all the things I was arguing for? Yeah, I probably was right. But I know that I didn't go about it in the right way. I know that I didn't do any of the things that I should have done, because at the end of the day, he was the head coach and I didn't approach it the right way. So I got myself removed. Even if you're right, it doesn't even matter. I know that I did what I did, and that's the reason that I was no longer there anymore. Now, I don't, that's, you have to accept those things. And I think a lot of people have a hard time accepting what they actually did wrong, or just being able to look themselves in the eye and say they did anything wrong to get to that.
And the other part of it too is just accepting the fact that sometimes these things are not fair and they're out of your control. And if you spend, if we spend our lives stomping around upset over the things that we don't think were necessarily fair, we're never going to get anything done. The reality of it is life is not fair, and it is what it is. You got to accept it. You got to deal with it and move forward. And that's all that we can do. And I'll be the first to admit it took me over a year to get over that. It was a full football season before I was, emotionally ready to move past kind of what had happened.
Well, this has been a fantastic interview. I usually try to keep it between 20 and 30 minutes, so I'm not going to keep any more. And I know you've got to get back to family and stuff like that, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with me today, for sharing all of this great knowledge that obviously there's a ton to learn from. And I appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. You're a great friend, and who knows, at some point I might try and talk you back into this insane business that we're in. So thanks for having me.
I can tell you that, right? All right. Thanks, Coach.
All right, buddy. We'll see you.